So I'll just read from the chapter Hope, the first chapter in the book now. Hope is a necessary ingredient for change, and I believe that hope is contagious. This is why we start this book with a chapter about it, to try to understand how we can use and share hope to help achieve justice for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Hope is like energy. Sometimes we only have enough to survive day by day, with nothing left in the battery to give to others. Or we might have the energy to do more than just get by. We might have enough to do good in the world if we so choose. Motivation is another key ingredient to change. It can help us decide what we will choose to use our energy for and how we will direct it. If our hopes were only about ourselves, our personal pleasure and our profit, then the world would spiral into a scary place. Whereas if our motivation is also about others because we feel solidarity, empathy or love for them, and we are moved by a desire for fairness, then we tend to listen, learn and act in their interest as well as our own together. If we cannot bring ourselves to believe that change is possible, then we may be in a state of hopelessness, or we might have the energy but use it in destructive ways. That condition is just as contagious. On the other hand, if we believe that we can eventually bring about change, then we can start to take the necessary steps to achieve that goal. By the end of this book, I hope you will have the energy, motivation, and ultimately the belief in what you can do to bring about positive change in the lives of First Nations people and for all Australians. I want you to have your own clearly defined hope for a better future. Before I go on, I would love feedback from the audience. I think by providing it to the email address or whatever, yeah, Jackie, because it's still a work in progress. I've almost finished it, so there's not much room for change, but I would love to hear your thoughts. I'll read on. Politics matters is the subheading here. This newfound feeling of responsibility, because I'm just skipping some long anecdotes here to get to some more of the meaty bits. This newfound feeling of responsibility soon expanded when I learned that politics matters. Politics is in everything we do, even when we choose to do nothing. My definition of politics includes the activities of all lawmakers, including governments, and how they're influenced. Politics is also someone's opinions about societal matters and how they use their opinions to influence others. As well, politics is about relationships within a group or organisation that allow particular people to have power over others. For some, let's call this group the bad actors. Politics is their path or their method to achieve personal gain and power. Their goals may be to gain popularity to feed their ego, or plain old greed to accumulate wealth. Let's look at an example. The fossil fuel lobby and politicians who are financially supported by the fossil fuel industry might use political strategies to delay action on climate change. The highly paid lobbyists, who are often ex-politicians, the company shareholders, and the top executives with their big bonuses have made billions of dollars between them during the many decades in which we have known that we should and could invest in a transition to clean energy. While this is happening, many Torres Strait Islanders who are losing their homes and lands to rising sea levels will be seriously harmed by the politics of bad actors. But this is how decisions are being made in Australia and in many other nations. For others, let's call this group the rest of us. Participating in politics is to hope that everyone can share in the benefits that our society can offer. The rest of us want peace and prosperity for our families, but we don't want that to come at the cost of harming anyone else. The more of us who are in this group and who are well-informed, organised and acting, the more power we will have. It's up to the rest of us to achieve justice for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and to bring about changes that will help all. I've still got some of this in red markings here, so I can't read my writing here. Help all of us have a better life. Many good people are struggling in life, paying the bills, raising children, looking after their elders, trying to stay sane as the challenges roll in like waves in a relentless storm. They struggle to find the energy to hope But when we work together, when we engage in politics in its broadest definition, supporting each other in our times of need, we give each other hope and the energy to build the political power necessary for positive change. I'll read on. Resilience against hopelessness. In early 2023, after more than 2 centuries of genocide, dispossession and exclusion, and a widening gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people in the past decade, the majority of Indigenous people dared hope we would have a place at the decision-making table. We thought we might finally be recognised in the Australian Constitution, but instead, during the referendum campaign, we found ourselves on trial, expected to answer for all the wrongs against us, as if we were the perpetrators of crimes we did not commit. I will discuss the tactics that bad actors use and how their friends in the media reliably amplify their negative spin in the Truth and Lies chapter. But here I want to mention the importance of resilience and how it relates to hope. Politics is an eternal tug of war, left and right, right and wrong, us and them, positive and negative, 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 negative. This is one of the reasons that Australians tend to be disengaged from it. Bad actors want us to disengage, to not care enough, to give up and focus on ourselves without pursuing the truth. They want us to be so polarised that we cannot discuss politics at the kitchen table. We need to build a resilience to the discomfort we feel when we discuss political matters. Then we can talk with our friends and family about matters that we believe are important for our whole community. During the referendum campaign, I was a national scapegoat. The No campaign took their first swipe at me through the Murdoch media with a full page of mashed together quotes, things I had said throughout almost a decade of activism. The quotes were indeed ideas I had talked about, even supported during the shaping of my personal political beliefs, and as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people negotiated our way forward. Pay the rent, reparations, tearing down the institutions that harm us. Shocking, isn't it, that a people so wronged would discuss such ideas? There were many instances when I made speeches at rallies for justice. Was I supposed to politely sing Advance Australia Fair among aggrieved families following another death in custody? Snip a clip from an impassioned speech here, extract a quote from a debate there, present it all together, and there you have it, the scary black man trope. Going back over my years of passionate advocacy, they found all they needed to present the angry black man who was here to take your land. They made me the stereotype of militant union thug, a communist who hates Australia. The only truth in that is that I am a member and leader of a union, and I'm proud of that. Soon after, an official No campaign full-page advertisement was printed in the Australian Financial Review. It depicted a caricature of me wearing raggedy jeans and a red shirt with a communist logo on it, dancing a jig for money. The bad actors brought me to my lowest moment in the campaign. I contemplated quitting. It was hard to think clearly, and I was sorely missing home. I felt like I no longer had energy for others. Many other Indigenous leaders who stepped up to support the voice experienced this. So did non-Indigenous supporters who were harassed online and at market stalls, mentally slapped around to get an angry reaction. I share this because we must inoculate our hope against the bad actors' tactics of intimidation that will be used again and again. They will try to bully us into silence, the ways to sever support from the public, and on social media especially, they will use trolls to make us feel alone. The way to deal with this type of intimidation is to double down on our loud, proud support for what we believe is right. We should not be cowed to soften our stance when what we are working towards is justice. When I was unfairly represented in the media, I was saddened by the personal nature of the attacks, but especially by how the No campaign was dishonestly poisoning a rare opportunity for meaningful Indigenous recognition. I did not give up. Instead, I worked harder. Day and night, 7 days a week, I fought for our children who are being taken from their families, for Indigenous people who are dying in custody, to change a system that ignores their trauma and the racism that confronts them, not just on the streets, but also in the power structures of their nation. They say we should use our hope and resilience to build a hearth in our bellies. Whatever the bad actors throw at us, let it burn to give us energy. I ask that non-Indigenous people try to understand our anger when we protest. For my fellow Indigenous people, we should use our anger to be heard, but we should temper our anger, hone the edge of our rage into a key that will open hearts and minds, rather than a blade that will sever our support. When my children were born, I felt their vulnerability and it made me want to live for them. When I was learning about politics, I was discovering that the best way to live for them was to actively hope with like-minded people, because protecting their children protected mine too. We refused to give up hope. We experienced a loss at the referendum, but we gained resilience. A new generation of Indigenous leaders are ready. So that's part of the hope chapter. I hope that was, you agree it was compelling, and I look forward to your feedback about that. I think there's time to read a bit more. Yeah.
Do you mind if we just sit with that for a sec?
Yeah.
I'm seeing a lot of comments coming through, and I too want to thank you, Thomas, for your courage, your resilience, and you'll see online that there's lots of support. I definitely support your brother. I'm very thankful for everything that you do. Man, that hit home. That was hard, but I guess that sense of hope. Oh my goodness, how do you have hope in that environment, and how do we keep going? And as you say, we have to for our children, we have to for ourselves, we have to for the next generation. Auntie Jean Oscar talked yesterday also about hope, and whilst people, media in the audience also tried to bring her down, she remained that sense of hope. So I thought we'd just sit in that for a sec. You'll see the comments coming through, supportive, well said, words that people, you've articulated words that people have been thinking about, wanting to say, wanting to get out there. So the support is there. Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you, Jackie. Yeah, I thought it was really important to start with hope, you know, after the devastation of last year. So to sort of reignite that flame, I think, you know, not that many of us ever stop fighting, but we must continue, as you said.
Yeah.
The next chapter, I'll read some of these truth and lies, and I just thought it was as little as possible. I wanted to sort of be stuck in what happened last year, but there's some lessons that we must take from it. And there's also some accountability that needs to be said, I think, or brought to this. And in this chapter, I talk somewhat about that. Since the referendum defeat, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people remain as determined as ever to achieve justice. We'll keep advocating for change because it is about the peace and prosperity of our children, our communities, and in turn for all Australians. In the coming months and years, there'll be much said about what happened. There'll be in-depth discussions on how the various demographics responded to the yes and no tactics. Prominent actors will share blow-by-blow accounts about the push and shove during the campaign, and fingers will be pointed. Allegations made about who held what back and who could have and would have made a difference, where someone's brilliant ideas would have won the day, if only. But here in this book, let's remember we are striving to look forward with purpose. We're taking the lessons from the past so we can see justice for First Nations peoples in our lifetime. What's next will be better than yesterday if we understand the difference between truth and lies. It's important to understand that as we continue to strive for justice, that you know you are far from being alone. During the referendum campaign, we amassed around 60,000 volunteers, many of whom had never participated in an election campaign in their lives. 6 million people voting yes is a substantial chunk of Australians. Before now, for all we knew, we were just 4% of the population. Now we know we are almost 40%. The no vote was not Australians saying no to progress. I believe most no voters too want to see a better future for Indigenous children. Yet some who led the no campaign have been using the outcome to argue against any recognition of Indigenous Australians at all. have been arguing that a no vote was a clear rejection of the Uluru Statement, an obvious lie to anyone who read the referendum question. Regression is being pushed in the states and local government areas as well. The Liberals in Queensland and Victoria have since announced they will repeal treaty legislation if they are elected. And in some local government areas, councils have removed the traditional welcomes and acknowledgements of country from their meetings and events. Just as concerning are the reactions from some progressives. When the Prime Minister defended the decision to change the stage 3 tax cuts, he ridiculed the coalition as the no-alition, listing their negative positions, but he omitted to mention that the coalition had led a dishonest no campaign against the voice. It concerns me that there may be a reluctance to demonstrate leadership and vision in Indigenous affairs, while the Albanese government has wasted no time achieving excellent practical outcomes, such as in Indigenous housing, employment and education. We cannot lose sight of the need for structural and systemic reforms to address the core of the problem, the torment of our powerlessness. Later in this chapter, I'll address some of the lies we hear in Indigenous affairs. But before we get there, it's important to explore how it is that Australians do not know who Indigenous people are, and how this unfamiliarity made voters susceptible to the disinformation and stereotypes about them. Herein is the way forward as well. We must find ways to have conversations about how proud we are of Australia's Indigenous culture and heritage, not less. In the introduction to this book, I quoted Noel Pearson's Boyer lectures in 2022. He said, "We're a much unloved people. We are perhaps the ethnic group Australians feel least connected to. We are not popular, and we are not personally known to many Australians. Few have met us, and a small minority count us as friends. And despite having never met many of us, and knowing very little about us other than what is in the media and what W.H. Stanner, whose 1968 Boyer lectures loom large over my lectures, called folklore about us, Australians hold and express strong views about us, the great proportion of which is negative and unfriendly. It has ever been thus, worse in the past, but still true today." You may have thought Pearson was being a little harsh or over the top to suggest that Indigenous Australians are unloved. I would have too if I had not felt how true his words are. I remember learning just how unfriendly white Australians could be to my people when I was around 9 years old. After a wonderfully memorable afternoon at Darwin Show, my parents, younger sisters and I were leaving the dusty car park. As we hit the Stewart Highway, a red ute drove alongside us with a group of young white men sitting in the tray. It bewildered and frightened me when, unprovoked, the men spat vile racist abuse at us, filthy yabos, dirty bungs and worse, and then sped away. My strongest memory from the bicentenary year is another example. I was 11 on a long driving holiday with my family. The car trip took us from Darwin down the Stewart Highway to Adelaide, returning home via the East Coast. To make the holiday affordable, we would often pull over to cook and eat dinner on the side of the road. Dad would drive through the night, napping in the car if he became too tired. My mum asleep in the front passenger seat and us 3 kids rugged up in the back. I experienced some of the best of the country on that trip. I also experienced the worst. In a small country town in the south of Queensland, a one hotel sort of town, the proprietors of the whole hotel wouldn't serve us. Perhaps we were going to stay in the hotel because Dad was particularly tired that evening, but he drove on. His anger would have kept him awake that night. Just as I write this chapter in the middle of January 2024, I received a text message from an anonymous person who obviously holds strong views about Indigenous Australians. If this number is correct, it should be Thomas Mayo. Mr. Mayo, as I live in Australia, I know what an Australian Aboriginal's appearance is, and it's not you. David Gulpilil, yes, but not you. I remind you that, yes, the full-blood Aboriginals were here first, then people from many other nations, then wannabes like you. You and your ilk are a byproduct of full-bloods and us. So remember, we were here before you, wannabes. The voice was decided with a no, you lost, move on. Wouldn't normally share a message like this, though it is one of many. that I've received, and there's been worse, menacing questions about family members and death threats. I felt that sharing these examples are important though. We need to remove any doubt about how strongly some Australians feel about Indigenous people, so negative and unfriendly, in a word, racist. I'm a person who tries to understand other people's behaviour. Why do Australians struggle to see who Indigenous people truly are and who we are today? If you think about it, we are far more likely to believe a rumour about a stranger than we are a friend. Familiarity matters. This plays out in the way Australians are led to believe the worst about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. That we are strangers to most Australians makes sense. Indigenous people are only around 4% of the population, spread across the vastness of one of the largest countries by landmass on Earth. But the reason for the negative and unfriendly views goes much deeper. In his 2022 Boyer lectures, Noel Pearson mentioned W.E.H. Stanner, a non-Indigenous anthropologist who gave the 1968 Boyer lectures. He explained a national phenomenon. Stanner was a man ahead of his time. He argued that Australia's sense of its past, its very collective memory, has been built on a state of forgetting which couldn't be explained by absent-mindedness. To get his point across, he used a powerful analogy showing how ignorance towards Indigenous Australians, our existence, our humanity and our rights has been by design. He said, it's a structural matter, a view from a window which has been carefully placed to exclude a whole quadrant of the landscape. What may well have begun as a simple forgetting of other possible views turned under habit over time into something like a cult of forgetfulness practiced on a national scale. Stanner's analogy can be seen in those colloquial statements prevalent in the comment sections on social media and online articles. That was in the past. They should just get over it. We're all Australians now. In translation, they're saying, don't look out that window. Remember, we must forget. This cult of forgetfulness burdens Australians with long unresolved guilt. When some people are forced to face the predicament of Indigenous people, this guilt can violently surface as anger. Such strong feelings were certainly felt on polling booths at the referendum. People also deal with guilt through cognitive dissonance, which basically means ignorance. While goodwill was often expressed, many Australians struggled to resist an overwhelming urge to find reasons, often completely unfounded reasons, to deny the most modest of proposals, a representative body elected by Indigenous people to give policy advice about what they know best. The greatest challenge to achieving justice for Indigenous Australians is therefore twofold. Firstly, Australians need to get to know themselves. They need to understand they carry guilt, bias and prejudice that will take a conscious effort to overcome. We must also help them to overcome the second, though equally important task ahead of us. We need all fair-minded Australians to become familiar with our culture and the history of our struggle. We must inoculate our fellow Australians from the lies with the truth. Just the last bit now. A note about bad actors. Almost 60 years on from Stanner's groundbreaking lecture, the Australian public was invited to widen their view through that window so they could appreciate the full vista of who we are as Australians by dispelling the cult of forgetfulness at its core in our Constitution. Collectively, we're on the cusp of stepping toward the window until someone chose to obstruct the view. What would compel someone to stand in the way of such an important revelation? Pearson outlined what proved to be an irresistible temptation for bad actors in the Boyer lecture. And he said, if success in the forthcoming referendum is predicated on our popularity as a people, then it is doubtful we'll succeed. It does not and will not take much to mobilise antipathy against Aboriginal people and to conjure the worst imaginings about us and the recognition we seek. For those who wish to oppose our recognition, it will be like shooting fish in a barrel. An inane thing to do, but easy. A heartless thing to do, but easy. The leader of the coalition, Peter Dutton, might have listened to Pearson's speech in 22 and agreed with the analysis. Perhaps it was a light bulb moment for him as leader of the opposition. Here was an irresistibly, sorry, I've just lost myself. Here was an irresistibly easy target, a minority who were strangers to most of the Australian electorate, with his opponent, Albanese, who had worn his heart on his sleeve to support them. Dutton had no need for logical arguments against an advisory voice. There were none. He did not need an idea about a better policy for Indigenous recognition or how to close the gap. All the opposition leader needed to do was ask questions without ever accepting the answers, not from Indigenous leaders, nor from the greatest legal experts. For example, the referendum was only asking if there should be a voice, because how constitutional institutions functions are a matter for him and his fellow parliamentarians to decide when they have the green light from the voting public. The type of detail he was requesting was disingenuous, mischief-making, but he just kept asking, and his friends in the media did not hold him to account. They reported his queries as if they had uncovered a secret plot, an inane thing to do, but easy. Keep the opposition leader's record in mind here. He is a man who was caught joking about how people in the Pacific would be affected by rising seas while at the meeting with Pacific leaders about those exact concerns. He's a self-proclaimed hard man on asylum seekers, and he walked out of the 2008 apology to the stolen generations, showing little remorse until early 2023. To move forward, we must be aware of bad actors like Dutton, who will try to take the heartless but easy route to power. We should never award such cruelty from parliamentarians, especially not from those who aspire to be Prime Minister. In any analysis of the referendum, whether in a conversation at home or at work, or in an article, book or essay, it may be that you agree with the arguments about flaws in the Yes campaign's central messaging. You may speculate on what the Prime Minister may have done differently, or in hindsight, you might believe we should have waited for bipartisanship from the coalition, even though they are dominated by hardline Conservatives. While all of this is fair game, there's one fundamental question that should be asked at the start and end of your discussions about what went wrong. Who used gross disinformation and blatant fear-mongering to win, and at whose cost? Or in other words, who was holding the smoking gun the day after the referendum, and who were the fish in the barrel? So, yeah, those are the extracts that I wanted to share. After that, I give some advice on how to handle people that believe the disinformation and that have those stereotypes, that have fallen for some of the conspiracy theories that they hear in the world. Just some simple advice to help people in those conversations with family and friends. And then the rest of that chapter is just some things about critical thinking as well. But then some things like some lies that we'll hear as we move forward, lies that we heard during the referendum campaign that they'll continue to use. Yeah, so thank you for listening, everybody.
Thank you, Thomas. Very powerful. Again, be a good read when it comes out. What date's it coming out again?
2nd of July. Yeah, I was originally aiming for May, but
Yeah.
that was a bit crazy, to try and do it then. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely look forward to that. The Mentimeter is set up for some questions. Obviously, we won't get through all the questions, but as Thomas said, he's really keen to get your feedback on what you've heard today, and any questions that we don't get to, we'll ask Thomas to help us fill them out and get back to you if we can. So the first question we have, Thomas, it's concerning to see the government responses and media coverage regarding young people and crime in multiple locations across Australia. Do you agree this is linked to the defeat of the voice?
I think that there has been a long and consistent problem with the way government responds to that very important matter. And so I don't think it's anything new, but what I think the loss at the referendum has done is it has made it worse, I'd say. Yeah.
Yeah, I tend to agree that since the referendum, from a personal perspective, it feels as though some people in our population feel entitled to tell you their negative opinions and their racist words. It's kind of given them a sense of power that they have that obligation to share that with you. Whereas where our voice is not heard in terms of what we need and what support we need. So yeah, and I would say that from my experiences in the media definitely play into that negative racist positioning. And that's the information that Australian public are getting and listening to, unfortunately.
Yeah, so unless we're getting organised and pushing back against that,
Yeah.
that will continue to steamroll us. We've got to be louder and prouder, as I said.
Yeah.
We've got to take on the disinformation. I mean, the facts are all there. All of the evidence backs that tough on crime does not work.
Yeah.
It makes things worse. It makes things worse, and I do touch on that in the book as well, to try and give people the tools they need to break down that disinformation they hear.
Yeah. And I was at the Close the Gap report launch last week, which talks about continued support for the full implementation of the Uluru Statement from the Heart, but also about, in terms of voice, what we were asking for was a seat at the decision-making table. So when we talk about crime, or we talk about all these issues that are being portrayed as negative for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, where are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people at the table when these decisions are being made? Where's their voice? We have the solutions. We know what works for our communities. We know how to support our kids and what good support for them looks like, but we're just not in those discussions or at those tables. Okay, next question. How can we avoid polarization in this struggle? Not with those who don't support justice for First Peoples, but with people who want a different approach than that put forward in the vision for voice.
Those who don't support. Yeah, okay. I think it's a good question. I think we're past, and I'm just off the top of my head here, so obviously on the fly. I think we're somewhat past that moment, of contention about if we push for constitutional recognition or not.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I think that was one of the conflicts amongst our mob. There was a people that believed that that was the wrong approach, and I think we're beyond that now. I think from this we have created, I think, some great fresh and new leadership that stepped up during it, all around the country, in small towns, not just everywhere. We've seen some great people get some experience and step up and sort of and find their way. So I think we can be more united than ever. I think we've just got to get that confidence again. And I know that there is a lot of work being done to try and create opportunities for us to come together again, as we did in Uluru many years ago, back in 2017. And that's where it's at. I think more united than ever, lots more experience and resilience from that. What they say, from what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And if you look at the history of our struggle as well, everything we've tried, for equal wages, the long march to the 1967 referendum, for land rights, for native title, we were always told no first. That didn't stop us, it didn't divide us, it made us stronger each time that happened. And I think that's the case with what we have done last year.
Thanks, Thomas. Next one.
South Australia. Thomas, do you have any comments on the version of The Voice underway in South Australia? No, only that, I have great hope for it. I think it's a great step. It's something that the South Australian state government should be congratulated for, and sort of standing firm through all of the bullshit through, the last 12 months as well. And the mob there that are having a go, I hear there's lots of nominations. I'm watching with great interest and great hope, and all of my solidarity and love to the mob in South Australia as they make this work. It's going to have its ups and downs. Jackie and I were talking at breakfast. before this, you know, like our democracies should have, like all democracies, they have ups and downs. You choose poor leaders sometimes, and your organisation goes through problems that need reform or updating of constitutions and things like that. But our organisations, our representative bodies, have never had the opportunity to really evolve in that way like other institutions do. And I think even through the hard times that South Australian voice might have, we've got to be robust. We've got to support it, at the same time challenge the leaders when needed, and always look to improve that voice and how it represents our mob that need the representation the most.
Yeah, do you believe that we can improve mainstream systems, or should we start creating parallel systems to serve the society at large, not just the privileged ones?
I believe that we should do both. Absolutely both. There is no escaping. One of the reasons why I was all for constitutional reform, to empower our mob and to have us officially recognised in the rule book of the nation, was because we can't escape being under the Constitution. That's just, I think as an organiser, as a campaigner for a long time, you need to understand the world as it is when you are working out what you're going to do and how you're going to campaign. The world as it is that we are a very small minority in this country, and as a Torres Strait Islander as well, we're a minority within a minority. We're never going to be separate from the Australian Constitution, because the only way you do that is through some really extreme ways that we just don't have the capacity to do as a people, as has happened in other colonised countries. So I think we should do both. We should be always striving to improve the systems that we are forced to live in since colonisation, and we should be establishing independence, economic independence, an independent voice that's not subject to, and in all areas, including our big bodies, and the ability to stand up unapologetically speaking for our interests. That's what we should be doing at the same time.
Thank you so much, Thomas. Thank you everyone for your ongoing contribution to Allies for Uluru and staying connected, and for your continued motivation and momentum to keep going forward. Thank you so much, Thomas, for your time, and you're always being available and supporting us in terms of your engagement with the Allies for Uluru. We really do appreciate it. We acknowledge that there's a lot of power in our continued collaboration and our ongoing commitment and accountability as allies is crucial to meaningfully shifting the dial for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And for all our allies, we thank you with all our heart. The next part of this continuing allyship series is Treaty, and will be held on the 10th of April. The event registration page will be circulated shortly after this meeting, and I encourage all of you to attend, but also to share widely across your networks to continue the conversations and continue the information sharing. Any follow-up discussions from today, please reach out to the team at info@alliesforuluru.org.au. Thank you again for your time, and hopefully we'll catch up soon. Take care, everybody. Bye.
Yo.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Allies for Uluru Continuing Allyship Part 2 Treaty series. We have a very special guest with us today, which I'll mention very soon, but I would like to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from the beautiful lands of Garramilla, Darwin, on Larrakia Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past and emerging, and acknowledge that Garramilla is my home, but it's not my country. I'm Jackie Adams. I'm Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, very lucky to have both, and my ancestral links are to the Withathi and Yatagana peoples of far north Queensland and the Gurindji and Kaurareg peoples of central Western Northern Territory, with extended family ties across the Torres Strait and adopted into Warlpiri, Yuendamu. Please feel free to share and acknowledge your country wherever you're coming to us from today. And yeah, I work for the Fred Hollows Foundation. I'm the Director for Social Justice and Regional Engagement, and the Allies for Uluru concept was launched through our work that we do in the international NGO space, and for our continued and relevant support to the Uluru Statement from the Heart since 2017 and constitutional reform prior to that. So the Allies for Uluru was launched in February last year as a group of organisations mobilising support for the Uluru Statement from the Heart and the Voice to Parliament campaign. We are now over 300 organisations and committed to continuing our allyship to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and the path forward that they lead us on. So the purpose of this second webinar in our series the second of our Voice, Treaty and Truth following the referendum webinar. We were fortunate to be joined by Ngarra Murray today. I first met Ngarra when she was the executive lead of Oxfam Australia's First Peoples program in about 2021, I think, Ngarra, when we had reached out to Oxfam to set up the International NGO Roundtable, again in support of the Uluru Statement from the Heart and its implementation against Voice, Treaty and Truth. So we reached out to our sector, which is international NGOs that are based in Australia. And like Fred Hollow said back in the day, we needed to look at our own backyard. So we reached out to Oxfam to support us in building this momentum around international NGOs that are based in Australia, ensuring that they looked after and thought about the issues that were affecting Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians. So we're very thankful that Oxfam came on that journey with us and have stayed on that journey through the formation of the Allies for Uluru and helped us co-lead now with ANTA this momentum, this coalition, and this work around allyship that we really need to ensure the voices of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are heard in this country. So amongst the many achievements of Ngarra, Ngarra was elected as co-chair of the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria in July last year and comes to us in this capacity today. So thank you so much for your time, Ngarra. It's such an honour to have you here, and I can't wait to hear what you have to say. I'll hand over to you now to introduce yourself, if that's okay.
Thank you, Jackie. And hello, everyone. I'm really excited to be here today and talking with you all. As Jackie said, my name's Ngarra Murray, and I'm a proud Wamba, Yorta, Dhudhuroa and Wurrung woman. And along with my fellow Assembly member, Ruben Berg, I'm the co-chair of the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria. I'm also a council member and I represent the Metropolitan region. I'll start by acknowledging the lands that I'm on. So I'm on the Wurrung country. So I acknowledge traditional owners of the Wurrung and the lands that I'm on today. And I also acknowledge the care that Wurrung have had for their country over generations, but also their ongoing work to protect and heal country. And our countries right across not only the state of Victoria, but across Australia, really hold the markings of our history. And this country's felt thousands of generations of footsteps and was crisscrossed by our families. And our country was pristine and plentiful of resources. And our people lived in harmony with the land and waters and within our kinship structures, and where the foundation of our relationships was really based on our coexistence and the sharing of resources. And we did all this, of course, as I said, over thousands of generations, but over thousands and thousands of years. And I think that since the invasion to this harmony, which was really disrupted in a way that was catastrophic for our people. And I don't really need to give a history lesson or overview of that, but you understand, where we come from. But this is why I believe that we need to negotiate a better and a fairer deal for our people through treaty. And sometimes you've got to look back to go forward. And I think there's an important role our Truth Telling Commission currently has around the inquiry, which I'll talk a little bit about that as we go through the conversation. And ultimately, for us, the treaty process, it's about our future. So in treaty, we have a really critical opportunity to heal our country and our people and everybody that lives on these lands. And when we can repair and rekindle and expand our ability to care for country, both the land and our communities will thrive. And when that happens, everyone benefits, everybody that lives on our lands. So I might talk a little bit about the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria, and it really is a place where self-determination is not just a concept, but a living reality in action. So it's an incredible responsibility and honour that we have to be part of the First Peoples Assembly here in Victoria. And I'm part of a collective that is really committed to shaping the future through the transformative power of treaty making. So we are a democratically elected body. There's 32 members, all traditional owners of country that represent the 5 regions of Victoria, and we're very diverse, very different mobs that come from all different parts of our state, and we're all here to have treaties in our future and all working towards the common goal of treaties. And the organisation, it really is a testament to the strength and resilience of our people, and it is a real diverse tapestry of leaders and trailblazers and activists and advocates who've tirelessly fought for justice and equal rights and the recognition of our people and our connection to country in this part of Australia. And we really do stand on the shoulders of those who really raise their fists and march for a better life for us and equal opportunities for our people and our families and a brighter future for our children and our communities. So it's a really unique organisation that we have in place. It came off the back of the Treaty Advancement Commission, and we've been established now for over 4+ years. And I'm in my second term. I was fortunate enough to be elected for a second term to come back onto the Assembly, and then elected by my fellow Assembly members to take up the role as co-chair. So the Assembly is unique. As I said, it's been going for 4.5 years, but it really is a culmination of all the fight for our rights that we've had over generations. So, you know, we started, a lot of our stories come from our missions and reserves, where our families come from, our grandparents were born or great-grandparents were born on. And then we've gone through an era of fighting for our rights, but also the advocacy side of it when it came to the community control sector and the fight for rights and for better organisations to serve our people. They've really been on the forefront of the political movement. And now we're kind of coming out the other side into a treaty era. So that's what we kind of call it. It's a new era that we're all kind of transitioning to. Our purpose is really clear in the Assembly. It really is to kind of reclaim First Peoples' power and our freedom, and ensuring that decisions about our people and our communities and our country are in our hands. And this is a collective journey towards treaty. Everybody has a role to play to get us where we need to go, and we're confident that it will really strengthen the common bonds to unite us all and all people that live on our country. And treaty is more than a destination, it's a journey that will really deepen our connections to the land and each other, because we have a responsibility as the First Peoples to look after everybody that's on our land. So we really envision a future where rights and dignity and sovereignty are respected, and that we're creating a healed and healthy country, as I said, where every individual plays a part and bears responsibility. So reflecting on the achievements of the first term of the Assembly, we really laid the foundation for treaty making, and we established the ground rules, and we've got a now newly established independent treaty authority, which is just kind of starting up. And we've also put in place a self-determination fund to support traditional owner groups to take up their rights, but to get to the table, as there'll be many treaties. There'll be a statewide treaty, and there'll be treaties with traditional owner groups across the region. So I'll talk a little bit about that soon. So it's been a monumental feat, thanks to the commitment of our Assembly and our members and our communities, our elders and all people that live within our society as well. So it's been a huge monumental feat to get us to where we are today. And the diversity, as I said, of the Assembly really mirrors the richness of our communities. And some of you might know some of our members from across Victoria, but through treaty, I think we're really poised to return decision-making powers to local communities, into Aboriginal hands, and deliver better outcomes through respect and equality and shared responsibilities. So in the treaty space, we're in a really exciting space and time. Like, I'll talk a little bit about the referendum and the results from that, but for us in Victoria, we are in a really strong position and we're really busy around preparing for what treaties will look like in this state. And it's amazing sometimes to step back for a moment and realise that the history that we are making, it'll be for the generations to come. And it's never been done before in this nation, and we truly are at the forefront, I believe, to do treaties here in Victoria. So while the referendum was deeply disappointing, we had to get back to business pretty quickly down here in Victoria, as the Victorian treaty process is really starting to move quickly. And we are incredibly confident of securing a treaty agreement with the Victorian Labor government in this term that will deliver unprecedented structural reform for our people. So we've got a government committed here in the state of Victoria. And I think Victoria is, at the moment, the country's only viable near-term option for proving the structural reform concept by delivering that full package. When we talked about voice and treaty and truth and what that means to our people, we are in a good position, and we are on the cusp of getting it done. So it's very much within our reach, and I'm very excited to be able to, have this discussion with you and to let you know where we're at. So, for years we've been having the conversations with community, and we'll continue that in the lead up, but we'll sit down with government and start to negotiate a statewide treaty later this year. So as I said, this has been decades in the making, and our ancestors fighting, that whole time to get us to where we are today. For me personally, the fight for land rights, for example, I spoke at the Wurrung inquiry last week, but it's been over, several generations, and something that we've inherited, through the generations, the fight for our rights, the fight for justice and for equality. So it kind of would be remiss to not acknowledge the staunch advocacy, as I said, of those before us, and that we walk in their footsteps. So we always acknowledge our elders and our staunch leaders and the trailblazers that come before us. So over the next 12 months, I really believe that 2024 and 2025 are going to be really landmark years for our people down here. And we've been striving for treaty, and we've been, yearning for our inherent rights as the first peoples to be respected and upheld, and been fighting to have our voices heard. So we've worked on our collective power, so building our collective power and positional power, and the ability to have a genuine say over the matters that affect us. And you'll start to see that change happening, within our region. So I think we can herald a new era of treaty and Aboriginal self-determination and put it into practice. So that's why I think at the Assembly we have a well-known quote, but obviously, nothing about us without us. That's something that we always consider. So that's sort of what treaty's about, and our people making the decisions about our communities. That's what it is. That's what it will come down to. I'll talk a little bit about Yurrung. In 2020, the First Peoples Assembly members called on the state to establish a truth-telling process using Royal Commission powers, but ensuring that both the Assembly and the state were equal partners in the process. That was really important. So that's how the Yurrung Justice Commission was established, and we now have a truth-telling inquiry underway. Their first couple of themes that they examined were the criminal justice system and child protection system, and they're now currently in the land injustice theme. They've got health, housing, education, economics, those other things will come. And the first thing that the Assembly did negotiate was the Yurrung Justice Commission to undertake the process. And that was a message that we heard loud and clear too from within our community engagement, that there could be no treaty without truth. So when you think about where we've come from to build our voice and have an Aboriginal representative body, and then we had Yurrung undertake the truth-telling at the same time, and then also preparing for our treaty negotiations that will happen, as I said, later this year. So there's a lot of important work that Yurrung are doing, and I really encourage you, if you're not familiar with Yurrung, to check out what they're doing. And I know that you have a truth webinar coming up as well, so make sure you come back to check out that too. And I think Yurrung works really to make recommendations about practical solutions, and these will very much inform many aspects of what we'll seek to negotiate in statewide treaty. So Yurrung will complete their report, I think, next year. So it'll, inform many of our discussions throughout the statewide treaty negotiations. and they're getting a lot of work done and really getting to the bottom of things. So I think that, yeah, there's been profound things coming out of Wurrung, just in the last couple of weeks. So I think, yeah, make sure you can check out their hearings. They're online at the moment. You can check on their website. I'll talk a little bit about the treaty landscape. So the foundational pieces that have been built over the first term. So what we put in place was the treaty negotiation framework, and it operates at 2 levels. So firstly, the treaty negotiation framework will allow for traditional owners of country to negotiate treaties that reflect their aspirations and priorities in the areas. So there'll be many treaties. There's many tribes in Victoria. So there'll be many treaties across the different regions, and that'll be the business of the traditional owners. And they'll be able to do that at their own pace, in their own ways. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. And treaty will result in local Aboriginal communities having the ability and tools to develop and deliver practical solutions at a local level. And keeping in mind, like, what happens in country like of the Gunai people in the southeast may not have the same aspirations and needs in the treaties of the Wamba people in the northwest on the Murray River. So they'll vary from tribe to tribe. So this is important. And, our people are the experts when it comes to our people and our communities and, our lives. So I think that'll be really significant to see the traditional owner groups take up the treaty negotiation framework, and they'll find their entry point to be able to kind of activate their treaties with local governments or the state. It shouldn't be a surprise to anyone to say we know more about what our community wants and needs than some of the politicians whose loyalties to a political party, not an external community. So when it comes to those local issues within our areas, the treaty framework will put locals in the driver's seat. So that's really important for those communities. The second level of the framework, as I said, we have a hybrid approach. So we'll have a statewide treaty. So the Assembly is preparing to apply to the Treaty Authority to do the statewide treaty. So there's a process there. But the statewide treaty will drive the big picture reforms at a statewide level. So statewide matters, whether it's in regards to health or housing or education, that'll be for the statewide treaty, and that'll drive the big picture reform. So that's where the Assembly comes in. We've got the democratically elected representation. So we represent, all pockets of the state, and it's time for our members now to step up its role and our responsibilities. And we're talking about a version of the Assembly that has decision-making powers when it comes to Aboriginal matters. So, think about, instead of some minister of First Peoples making decisions about us, that those decisions were made by us. So that's a way to kind of look at it. And that's what we're kind of pushing for, to have that decision-making power when it applies to First Peoples. And we'll also want the Assembly going forward to provide advice and guidance, to the state, but it comes to core matters about Aboriginal people. We want the decisions being made, by our people. So these frameworks, we've aimed for it to achieve exactly that. And as I said, nothing about us without us. So that's a conversation that we're having now as we're preparing. And it's not just a philosophy that we're striving to achieve either. It's a philosophy we're embracing as we do things. So self-determination is not only our destination, it's how we get there. One recent example I'd like to share is around a decision that we made as a chamber, as a collective, because we have a lot of strength in our collective, all 32 members. So it's a very unique leadership and a unique collective strength that we bring. But one decision that we made recently, and we had a lot of yarns about it and discussed ways that we could create a seat for tribes that aren't recognised formally by the state government. And one of those groups was the Wamba people. So the people up in the Swan Hill region in the northwest, they applied for a seat through our new process, which we call additional pathways, to take up a seat. And that really was a huge success and an example of us doing things our own way, because it had no interference from government. And we decided that we supported this group to take up their rightful seat on the Assembly, and they hadn't been down the kind of native title, pathway, or, they don't have a Traditional Owner Settlement Act, agreement, but there was a way that we could recognise our First Peoples, and it's all around inclusivity and bringing in our Shoshone group so that we don't leave no one behind. So that was a really important example of how mob decide who mob is and how we organise ourselves, because we don't want to limit ourselves by colonial systems and ways of thinking. So we're trying to, decolonise and change the way we take part in formal structures and, deconstruct white constructs that have been imposed on us, so that is real self-determination, and we don't want to be limited by colonial systems, because we're trying to change the way, that we go into the future. At the end of the day, I think treaty really must deliver tangible structural change, because ultimately we want to use treaty to move away from piecemeal arguments about which policies are good and bad, and instead focus on who is best placed to be developing the policies and transfer those decision-making powers. So we believe when it comes to our mob that, we're the experts, and that's why the framework aims to ensure that communities have the ability and tools to develop and deliver practical solutions at a local level. There are two really crucial elements of treaty I'll quickly touch on. It's the Self-Determination Fund and the Treaty Authority. So the fund, as the name describes, is a fund by mob for mob, and it has really key functions. It's going to help resource Shoshone groups to get themselves organised and mobilised and prepare for their own treaty negotiations. And then secondly, it's going to be a shared resource to help build wealth and prosperity for communities. So to try and repair the economic disadvantage that has flowed down and compounded, over generations since our, invasion and dispossession. So we can't, change the past, but we can address the stolen wealth by repairing the impact, and we can demand investment in a better future for our people. So it really is a chance, treaty, for our people to prosper. When our communities are really thriving again, that's all we want. Our communities to be thriving on our country, and, our land and waters, are healthy and healed for all people that live here, and our rights and our, people as our status as the First Peoples of this land is respected. So that's all part of what we're kind of asking for. Now, the final building block is the Treaty Authority, which is newly established, and it is like what we call an independent umpire. So it's going to help us through disputes, and it's going to oversee treaties between the state and Shoshone groups and the Assembly. And those disputes, it might be with government, but they might be amongst ourselves. There's a lot of fractures in our communities from, systems and structures that have been imposed on us from colonisation. So there's definitely a way the Treaty Authority, as an Aboriginal-led body and culturally, strong, will be able to oversee, treaties, and they have a really big role to play. And we've got some really amazing respected community figures on that body, and it's really grounded in our culture and law to help guide us and find that common ground that we need to find. So all members of the Treaty Authority are really respected Aboriginal leaders. So I encourage you to look up the Treaty Authority as well. And I think, our next real milestone is when we apply to the Treaty Authority to be the Aboriginal representative body that will do the statewide treaty. So we're really excited about the Treaty Authority existing and coming into existence, and we'll apply to the body to show that we've done our homework, that we meet the standards outlined in our framework, and that we're ready to go. So once we get that green light from the Treaty Authority, we can start negotiating a statewide treaty. And we don't have exact dates, but I'd imagine we'll be sitting down with government, by September, October of this year, and getting down to business. So I think treaty is really how strong it is. It will improve the lives of our people, and it depends on all of us. As I said, we all have a role and responsibility to play. We need to harness our collective strength and our wisdom and to really get it over the line. So as we embark on this really historic journey, I think, we've got to recognise that treaty is an invitation for all Victorians to deepen their connection to this country and to understand and be on this journey with us. And we've really got to engage in those open conversations like this and listening and talking together, and then we'll be able to create a fairer, better, Victoria, for example, that benefits generations to come. So I think it's really vital, in our endeavour that that we are, you know, joining up forces and mobilising, and all that goodwill and support that we received throughout the referendum. How do we actually manifest that now, you know, into the treaty and truth-telling space? And, you know, we're going to need all our allies, and there's definitely ways that we can all participate and get involved in the treaty space, and the work that we're doing, not just within our own jurisdiction, you know, across the country. There's work happening in Queensland and the Territory, and, you know, SA have just got their voice. They've just elected their own representation, and, you know, you've got the mob in WA and Tasmania. So there's processes that mob are in all across the country, but I feel that we're really advanced here in Victoria. And I think that, you know, treaty really is an opportunity for an awakening and for recognition of, you know, thousands of years of history in the law of our country, where we're governed by our ancient jurisdictions, and everything that's happened to our people in our country, you know, over generations, needs to be recognised and understood by the wider community. So we really do need an awakening. I think that acknowledges and respects the uniqueness of this country and our people, and we've had thousands of years of Aboriginal custodianship right across this land, and that's what makes our country really special. So I think that, you know, I'm just really excited to come and speak with you today and tell you a little bit about treaty, and yeah, happy to answer any questions. I know, Jackie, I'll pass back to you, but hopefully that kind of tells you a bit about the treaty process in Victoria in a bit of a nutshell. And you know, there's a lot more work to come, but yeah, we're in a really exciting position and ready to begin our treaty negotiations towards the end of this year. So thanks, Jackie.
Thanks so much, Ngarra. So much information in such a short time, and obviously we acknowledge all the hard work, effort, sweat, tears and blood that's gone in behind all of that over 60,000 years ago, but particularly in establishing the Assembly. As an outsider, someone looking in, it's been very inspirational to watch the Assembly grow over the years and the achievements that you've made. If we look at the Uluru Statement and what we called for, again, another invite to Australians to walk with us for voice, treaty, truth. The Assembly's got all that going at once. So you guys should be very proud of yourselves, but also acknowledging that it's self-determination in action. And to hear that you can self-determine how you set up your council or how you progress with government and what your non-negotiables are, you know, it just gives me goosebumps that we can actually see this happening today. We know that the referendum wasn't the result that we wanted, and for some, it was a way to silence us. But to see the resilience and the strength of our mob just come out bigger, stronger, together, is proof of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's ability to just work through the storms. Just another barrier that's put in front of us that we work through. But we can't do all this work without our allies, so we really appreciate you being on the journey with us and taking the time just to hear us, just to listen and to take this information on board. The other part of that allyship is just getting a bit more informed yourselves so that you can help us have these conversations with the rest of Australia around the need to be better informed so we can make better decisions and support Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and our kids and their kids for a better future. So thank you, Ngarra. I just wanted to take the liberty as the facilitator to share a bit of the work that I've done around treaties, and really just to pose it as some more information to the group, and then we'll open it up for broader questioning. So a couple of years ago, I did a Masters of Social Change Leadership through the Atlantic Fellows for Social Equity. And this program is premised on Indigenous thought. So everything we had to think about it from an Indigenous perspective, both Australian and internationally. So I had the opportunity to do a little research and yarning circle on treaties, both in Australia and across other countries. And to hear that Australia is a signatory to many international treaties, but is the only Commonwealth country without a treaty with its Indigenous peoples is just crazy. You know, I knew it and I felt it, but to read it in black and white and to actually see it referenced in research is a whole nother level. But we need to acknowledge that this is not through lack of trying or desire from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. The Wurrung Statement of 1988, a clear example of where Australia's Indigenous peoples in North Australia called for the Australian government of the day, through Prime Minister Bob Hawke, for the rights of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples to be recognised. Now we know that this statement hangs in Parliament House, but it's never been realised. Yorta Yindi, we all know Yorta Yindi as a well-known Yolngu people's band. They acknowledge the unfinished business through their song, Treaty. And they say, well, I heard it on the radio and I saw it in the television. Back in 98, all those politicians, all those talking politicians, promises can disappear just like writing in the sand. This land was never given up. The planting of the Union Jack never changed our law at all. Treaty, yeah, treaty now. Treaty, yeah, treaty now. Those words ring no truer than now than they did back then. And as an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, I acknowledge that we do have a Torres Strait Treaty. But this again is an international treaty between the Torres Strait and Papua New Guinea. But I also acknowledge through my research that Indigenous peoples, Torres Strait Islander and Papua New Guineans, were not actually engaged in the writing of that or engaged in how it should be implemented. So the biggest criticism of that treaty is more about how it's implemented. So it's not about bettering the fishing rights and the economy of Torres Strait Islanders and Papua New Guineans, which is what it was set out to do, is more about protecting the rights of commercial fisheries and other people making money off Indigenous peoples. So I think Australia, not only through the truth-telling of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander history and our fight and our determination and our resilience, but even the processes and the government policies we put in place, we have to start questioning these. We have to start thinking about the perspective of our future, and do we continue on the same trail, you know? So thank you, Ngarra, for opening up this space for this kind of conversation. And I think we have the opportunity now to open the floor and see what questions people might have for you and I, particularly for you. All right, so there's one that's come in, Ngarra, and it says, to what extent will the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples be used to inform the authorities' own discernment process? Is it still relevant generally?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there were many discussions when we were building the framework to how we would embed UNDRIP into the framework. And when you have a look at our treaty negotiation framework, you'll see that it's underpinned by those principles. And we really wanted to make sure that the framework respected our Aboriginal law and our cultural authority and our ways of doing business. But UNDRIP, has been kind of cemented within our approach, and they're really a big part of our guiding principles. And there's a number of principles that we've put in place that are protected by law and have to be followed by all parties in treaty negotiation. So that's definitely approaches that we wanted to have in our thinking and how we actually, built the framework around self-determination and empowerment, fairness and equality, transparency and accountability. And there's minimum standards that the state will have to meet too on that. So they'll have to apply to the treaty authority as well. So, there'll be standards that they'll have to meet, but I think that it should be applied in all our approaches, and it protects our rights and respects and recognise our inherent rights. So yeah, I think it's been a big part of our thinking and the way that we've kind of embedded it in our framework and our approach.
Thanks, Ngarra. That's great. So I just want to ask the audience or everyone online to think about these questions and come back to us if you feel free to do so, or put something in the chat, or just have a think about them and think about them in your own context. So what actions can your organisation take to support a treaty process in your state or territory? What constraints or issues might you see from your organisational perspective? How can Allies for Uluru support your organisation to get behind the treaty process? Whilst people think about that, Ngarra, one question that always comes to mind is, we do all this great work, we're self-determining, we're setting up these processes and pathways that support us in getting where we want to go. How do we ensure that governments don't come in and just wipe it out? So we know that there's quite a number of state and territory elections coming up, the federal election is coming up soon. How do we protect that?
Yeah, that's going to be important, and that's something that we experienced, after the referendum, with the opposition withdrawing their support, and we'd made real effort to have strong relationships across all sides of politics, so working across all different parties. So that was really big, and for us to have those genuine and authentic relationships. So it was disappointing for us to have the opposition withdraw, but our door is always open, and we want to continue to have it open, for all people across our parliaments. But there's definitely ways we need to look at how we protect our rights into the future and when it comes to treaties. And I think that's an important role that our allyship will have around manifesting that support for treaty, but right to your local politicians, when you're lobbying and influencing, we're going to need that support right across the political sphere. And I think that's a really important role for the allyship and all the volunteers, that gave us their time and were generous with their time throughout the referendum. So how do we now harvest that and put that into the treaty space? And I think, little things that we can do, to kind of influence within the space is really important across our parliaments, across local councils. So all those conversations, we've got to keep continuing those yarns with all the different communities across our jurisdictions. So we've got to change mindsets and start to shift into what we're calling, the treaty era. And it's a treaty for the generation, because it'll benefit, generations to come, our kids and grandkids, and into the future. So I think there's definitely ways that we can look at that and how we kind of, bulletproof and protect, what we're building. We've got a whole Aboriginal democracy that we've created through the Assembly. We've got over 8,500 voters, that are active participants in our elections, and we've got thousands of traditional owners, right across the state that are active in their traditional owner groups and participating in the process. But we need everybody to be a part of it. I think it's a big responsibility that we all have for that change, and to have transformational change. It's a monumental feat that we're going to have to get to, but we know that we have that allyship and that support out there, and there's definitely ways that you can contribute and participate and get involved, in the treaty process.
So another question referencing the UNDRIP: will the principle of free, prior, informed consent also be reflected in the Victorian State Treaty?
Yeah, so that's something that we've unpacked a lot within our conversations. But as I said, UNDRIP's embedded, within our framework, all our thinking and our ways, of doing business. So I think that those principles all apply, to our spaces, and that's definitely a conversation that traditional owners will have within their own groups around the aspirations and priorities in the context of the treaties and what they want a treaty on. So we're looking forward, to hearing from all those traditional owner groups, and they're getting treaty ready and nation building and preparing. But yeah, that's definitely a strong principle that we have.
Awesome. And is there room in the scope of the treaty process for recommendations, requests, or even demands be directed at sectors beyond the government so that the whole community can respond?
Yeah, well, there'll be many treaties, as I said, like there'll be many treaties. Just for example, the Wurrung, they've got a number of local governments across their tribal territories. So within their jurisdiction, there'll be treaties right across local government. They can treaty with, all different types of groups. There'll be treaties with the state, there'll be treaty with, local government, there'll be treaties with ourselves. Like there's definitely an opportunity to have nation to nation treaties. There's a lot of healing that we need to do as First Peoples across our tribal territories. So there's treaties that will happen there. So, at this time, nothing is off the table. And I think that it's going to be what we make it around our relationships. And we've always had treaty relationships, our map of Australia, where you see all the Aboriginal language groups. So over 250 different groups. We had, relationships through songlines, through kinship, through trade. So we've always had those relationships based on our coexistence. So yeah, I wouldn't want to rule anything out, but there'll be many treaties to come. There's nothing stopping, NGOs and different organisations for having their own treaties with traditional owners. We do agreement making all the time in this country. So there's definitely ways that you can sit down at the table and kind of build those relationships around, respect and some shared obligations to how you interact with traditional owners on country.
Great. Any more questions or comments, Holly, Michael? One more. How important is it to have First Nations representation in local, state government and improving First Nations and broader community participation in democracy?
Yeah, it's so important, and that's something that we'll look at when we build the future assembly, because we're in kind of 2.0. We're looking at the next iteration, and that'll be a conversation for statewide to how we look at how we participate in the system or not, around, you know, designated seats, or whether it's providing advice, or whether it's executive power. All those things will be discussed, you know, leading up to a statewide treaty. But there's definitely opportunities to look at how we can have more Aboriginal representation across all levels, all tiers of government, and in all aspects, you know, things that are done on our country. So yeah, I think there's a real big opportunity to reset some of the relationships, but also look at the future of representation and respecting the traditional owners, you know, of the different regions that, you know, organisations, governments sit on.
Yeah, and I think that's a really great point, Ngarra, that the Assembly, for all the advances that it's made and the great work and frameworks that you have in place, it's still growing, it's still building, and it will, you know, self-determine itself into whichever way it needs to go through the voices of the people. So thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate your insights, and you're doing an amazing job as co-chair, and I hope, wish you all the best in continuing in that role. So thank you everyone for your ongoing contributions to the Allies for Uluru and staying connected, regardless of what happened last year. Ngarra, thank you again for your time and connecting with us and allowing us to hear your wonderful words. Acknowledge that there's a lot of power in our continued collaboration, and our ongoing commitment and accountability as allies is crucial to meaningfully shifting the dial for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. The next part of this continuing ally series is on truth-telling and will be held in early May, so watch out in your diaries. The event registration page will be circulated shortly after this meeting, and I encourage you to share as wide as you can. Again, we need to start sharing this information, ensuring more Australians are informed and supporting us. Also, follow up on today's discussion, please reach out to the team, and you can reach them on info@alliesforuluru.org.au. Thank you again for your time. Go well, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye. Okay, we might kick it off. Good afternoon, morning, evening, everybody, depending where you're coming from. I'm coming to you today from the beautiful lands of Garramilla, Larrakia Nation lands. I acknowledge the Larrakia people and their continued custodianship of the land, seas, airs, spirits, and all the ancestors that walk with us every day. I'm honoured to be on the land. It's not my country. I'm a Wuthuthi Yatagana person from far north Queensland, and we have ancestral links to the Gurindji and Kaurareg peoples of Central Western Northern Territory, and extended family ties across the Torres Strait, and adopted into Warlpiri, Yuin Damu. So thank you for joining us, Allies for Uluru, today. We have a special guest, CEO of Reconciliation Australia, Karen Mundine, and I'll move to Karen shortly. But I just want to acknowledge that the Allies for Uluru Coalition is some 300 organisations now. We formed as a mechanism to support the full implementation of the Uluru Statement from the Heart, Voice, Treaty and Truth. We've continued to stay on that trajectory and will continue to do so going forward. The job is not done. There's so much more to do. And we thank you all for staying with us and joining the Allies for Uluru and joining our webinars. This series we've done recently has been about voice, treaty and truth. Today is the third part of that, where we will talk truth-telling with Karen. And if we have time, we will open to questions if that's possible. But I ask you, while you're hearing from Karen and I, while you're sitting there, if you can reflect on what truth-telling means in this country. What is your responsibility in terms of truth-telling? So you support the Uluru Statement from the Heart, you understand what voice, treaty, truth in that context is, but what is your personal responsibility to support all of those elements, and particularly for today, truth-telling? So this week is National Reconciliation Week. Kicks off always with National Sorry Day. We acknowledge the stolen generations of this country, another area of truth-telling. And today is Torres Strait Islander Day, Torres Strait Islander Flag Day, I should say. So I'm taking some words from Reconciliation Australia's website. So 32 years ago, the Torres Strait Islander flag was designed by Bernard Namik Senior, was officially recognised and presented to the people of the Torres Strait at the Torres Strait Cultural Festival. During his speech, Bernard Senior described the symbolism of the design. What my design stands for is quite simple. The two green bands are the two mainland of Australia and Papua New Guinea. The blue is the waters of the Torres Strait, and the symbol that identifies every Torres Strait Islander everywhere is the dari, or the headdress, in the middle. The 5 points of the star are our group, the Eastern, Central, Western, Port Kennedy group, and the many that made the mainland their home. He likes to thank those of you who have accepted his design and time. So this for Torres Strait Islanders, for me, I'm very fortunate to be Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander. We specifically identify with the Torres Strait Islander flag. It's part of our identity, who we are, what we celebrate as Torres Strait Islanders. But we also celebrate the Aboriginal flag just as much. And both flags were recognised as official flags in Australia in only 1995, not that long ago. So thank you again for joining us. And again, if you can take this time while you're listening to us to reflect on your responsibility in terms of truth-telling. So I'm going to, without further ado, hand over to Karen Mundine, Chief Executive Officer, Reconciliation Australia. The floor is yours, Karen. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. And Jingiwala, hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for tuning in and what I know is a busy week for allies and supporters. Looking forward to our conversation in a little bit. As Jackie said, I am Karen Mundine. I'm a Bundjalung woman from the Northern Rivers of New South Wales. And the day job that keeps me off or on the streets, depending on the way you look at it, I'm CEO of Reconciliation Australia. Today, I'm joining you from the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, also known as Sydney and the Sydney Basin. And I too acknowledge and pay respects to Gadigal elders, those of today and yesterday, who have kept culture alive and who continue to provide guidance and wisdom. I also acknowledge all of the traditional custodians of the lands on which you're joining from. It's their strength and resilience that allows us to continue the important work of reconciliation. And it certainly reminds us that always was, always will be Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander land. Now, given we're here to talk about truth-telling, we certainly cannot talk about Gadigal country without emphasising that it was also the site of ground zero for colonisation. It was one of the early places where Aboriginal people and the colonisers came into relationship with each other. And it very much set the scene for what was to unfold across the rest of the nation. However, these lands were and are and always will be characterised by Gadigal culture, history and strength, both from before and after colonisation. And it's these foundational truths that underscore why we acknowledge country and why we pay respects to the resilience and guidance of elders. It's a truth that we learnt last year after the referendum was the urgent need for truth-telling and education on Australia's past. Because truth-telling is crucial for all Australians to appreciate our shared histories and to understand how these histories manifest in our relationships, communities, and the institutions today. As Jackie said at the beginning, truth is the third reform called for in the Uluru Statement from the Heart, a generous invitation offered to the Australian people to walk with us to build a better future for all of us. And in 2017, it called for a Makarrata Commission to supervise agreement making and to facilitate a process of local and regional truth-telling. Now, as already said, we are in the middle of National Reconciliation Week, which is an opportunity for all of us to reinvigorate our commitment to reconciliation and drive our messages far and wide. And I know I say this every year, and I've been doing this for a few years now, but this year that message hits a bit differently. Because at the heart of reconciliation is the relationship that Australians have with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. And I'm not telling any of you anything new, but it's fair to say that last year that relationship was damaged and the trust that has been built up has been eroded. This period is both an energising and deeply emotional time for all of us who do this work, because now more than ever, we need a more reconciled Australia. But this week, or NRW as we call it, it is our flagship public event. So to be honest, it's not just one single event. It's actually hundreds of events held right across the country in hundreds of workplaces, schools and early learning services, and in communities. And it's a time of very public commitment to a just, equitable and reconciled Australia. A commitment to the kind of Australia that over 6 million of us voted yes to live in. An Australia that recognises 65,000 years plus of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures, and that those cultures continue. An Australia where we support Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people having a say about the matters that affect our lives. An Australia where we see better lives and futures for our people. So yes, we lost the vote, and that's been a bitter pill to swallow, but we did not lose our will to keep going. It was certainly tested, that's for sure, but certainly not lost. So we all took our time out to work through our feelings of disappointment, despair and distress at the referendum, and to recharge our batteries after the physical exhaustion of the campaign. But throughout all this, we all kept turning up. And while those who do not have the best interests of our people and our country at heart, as they move on to their next campaign of misinformation, disinformation and conspiracy, we kept turning up. I was really heartened when I received your Allies for Uluru Statement of Commitment last week. And when I was reading through that, what jumped out to me was the sentence, "We will not be fair weather allies. We will not turn back, and we will not hesitate to continue to fight for justice and self-determination for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples." And this is exactly the kind of commitment and action we're also asking of all of our reconciliation supporters with our 2024 theme, Now More Than Ever. It's a call to action to seize the moment. To seize the moment, not in a way that pretends that what happened in the Voice referendum didn't happen, or that we are deaf to what happened, but to seize the moment by understanding what the referendum uncovered, and by understanding that this is the unvarnished truth of what we are now working with. If we do not do so, we risk breaking the legacy that we've inherited from generations of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander activists, advocates and leaders, and the allies who supported them, who fought for every one of the rights that we enjoy today. So now more than ever, it's time to learn from the lessons of the past and accept that without the full engagement of First Nations peoples in the life of this country, Australia is forever diminished. Now, this time of year is also one of when the truths of our history are very present. And as Jackie said, on Sunday, National Sorry Day, we remembered and acknowledged the atrocities faced by First Nations children and families who were forcibly removed from their families and communities. We highlighted the continuing impact of forcible removal and assimilation policies on stolen generations survivors, their families and communities, and the impact on our whole country. When I reflected on National Sorry Day, I was reminded of the words from Chapter 1 of the Bringing Them Home report, so the report into the National Inquiry into the separation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children from their families. And these words, and I quote, "In no sense has the inquiry been raking over the past for its own sake. The truth is that the past is very much with us today, in the continuing devastation of the lives of Indigenous Australians. That devastation cannot be addressed unless the whole community listens with an open heart and mind to the stories of what happened in the past and, having listened and understood, commits itself to reconciliation. End quote. Now, that report was released 27 years ago, on the 26th of May, 1997. I was in the room when it was tabled. And it was from a recommendation of that report that we commemorate National Sorry Day each year. Now, Sorry Day creates a space and time for us to not only hear the stories of the terrible devastation, to not only learn of the places that were sites of this devastation, but to also be humbled by the resilience and strength of survivors and their families. It facilitates the truth-telling process at all sorts of levels, including official apologies, inquiries, memorials, and community-led initiatives, all strongly led by the voices of the survivors and those who support them. The Bringing Them Home report and the report from the Royal Commission to Aboriginal Deaths in Custody stand tall in our recent history as two pillars of truth-telling as justice. That is, institutional forms of truth-telling that aim to provide redress for harms experienced and to achieve justice for First Nations peoples. The most prominent example of institutional truth-telling at the moment in Australia is the Wurrung Justice Commission, Australia's first formal Aboriginal-led truth-telling process, launched in 2022 in Victoria. And by the time of the delivery of its final report in June 2025, Wurrung aims to have established an official record of the impact of colonisation on the First Peoples in Victoria, to have developed and shared understanding among all Victorians of the impact of colonisation, as well as the diversity, strength and resilience of First Peoples cultures, and to make recommendations for healing, systems reform and practical changes to laws, policies and education, as well as to matters to be included in future treaties. They have so far heard evidence on child protection systems, criminal justice systems, and on issues related to land, sky and waters, among others. In fact, Wurrung's seventh round of hearings began this week, focusing on systemic injustice experienced by First Nations peoples in Victoria in relation to health, education, housing and economic life. And last week, as part of the recommendation from Wurrung, and it was also an outstanding recommendation from the Bringing Them Home report, Victoria Police formally and unreservedly apologised to Stolen Generation survivors and their families for the role that they played in the forcible removal of Aboriginal children from their families, culture and country. I was lucky enough last month to sit in on one of these sessions, and I have to say they are so powerful. Although they sit within a legal framework and context, the way that the Commission is at pains to do this from a strengths cultural lens is really important. And certainly most of the hearings are public and can be viewed on their website. So if you get a chance or you haven't already, take a look. It is moving and powerful, but it also says so much about what is possible. Now, truth-telling has been central to reconciliation since our predecessor, the Council for Aboriginal Reconciliation, began its work 30 years ago. And as the Australian Declaration towards Reconciliation made very clear, our nation must have the courage to own the truth, to heal the wounds of its past so that we can move on together at peace with ourselves. And as I said at the beginning, at its heart, reconciliation is about strengthening the relationships that non-Indigenous Australians have with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in ways that benefit all of us. And these relationships cannot function without a shared and honest understanding of where we've come from together. To better support advancing our relationships and to assist in tackling the challenges of this post-referendum world, we at RA sought to further understand what truth-telling actually means to both Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, as well as non-Indigenous Australians. Because we needed to have a clearer sense of what are some of the barriers to and enablers of truth-telling, and how this information can actually help progress truth-telling in community settings. So our commissioned research, undertaken by Professor Heidi Norman and Dr. Anne-Marie Payne, when it comes to First Nations peoples, the barriers to truth-telling include concerns around trauma and cultural safety, and concerns that truth-telling might emphasise divisions and differences between First Nations and non-Indigenous Australians. Barriers for non-Indigenous people included a lack of knowledge about how to get involved in truth-telling, and a lack of clarity about what their role is in this process. On the flip side, the enablers, or the opportunities for truth-telling for First Nations people, include the opportunity to celebrate resilience, there's that word again, and survival, and to tell family and local stories, which is so important to who we are. That's essential to culture. And the enablers for non-Indigenous people was to learn more and to show support so that they can actually contribute in a meaningful way to reconciliation. Now, through extensive interviews, online surveys, literature and media analysis, our researchers found that to be effective, truth-telling must be led by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and communities, and it absolutely must engage with First Nations perspectives. Truth-telling must recognise the ongoing impacts of the past on First Nations people's lives today, and it cannot be a one-off event. It is ongoing and must be understood as a process, much like reconciliation. Truth-telling is not an end in itself. It has to be achieved. It must aim to achieve change and improve outcomes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. While some of this may sound a little elementary to many of you who are engaged allies, we must take heed of what the referendum has revealed to us. And that is that under the bedrock of mainstream Australian society's good intentions, there is still a mantle of ill-informed and misguided conceptions about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and what's at stake if we don't embrace change. So the research piece, which is entitled Coming to Terms with the Past, Identifying Barriers and Enablers to Truth-Telling and Strategies to Promote Historical Acceptance, it's a significant piece of work on our journey towards ensuring all Australians are knowledgeable and engaged with the facts of our shared history. It definitely offers useful considerations for planning and delivering of effective truth-telling initiatives, including established trauma-informed, culturally safe protocols, and that the different assumptions of what truth-telling is need to be carefully navigated. There are definitely lessons for all of us here as allies and people wanting to undertake this kind of activity. And certainly as allies and co-conspirators, we've all got to potentially expect discomfort. We need to be open to complexity and uncertainty, and probably most importantly, to understand our responsibility to listen, to actively hear the truths that are being told. Certainly as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, we have repeatedly expressed that reliving our trauma through public truth-telling needs to deliver real change. And that certainly came out in the research strongly. Because truth-telling is not to stir up sympathy or provide entertainment, but it is to spark understanding, action, and most importantly, change. As the Bringing Them Home report said all those decades ago, in no sense has the inquiry been raking over the past for its own sake. And the same applies today. Reconciliation Australia, with this research, we are developing a new community truth-telling pathways program, which will support action and change through truth-telling activities. And it hopes to raise awareness and understanding of what truth-telling means in the Australian population, and to raise information and advocacy for more of the same. For more to change. There are 4 core pillars that frame the program, which is community-led, as I said, that truth-telling is Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander centred, that it's responsive to the needs and aspirations of First Nations peoples and of place. Community-led truth-telling also implies a collective and inclusive process in which the emotional and logistical labour is shared. So this can't all be on us as First Nations peoples doing the heavy lifting. It's something as a community we all have to get involved in. Place-based is absolutely important, and truth-telling really speaks to the centrality of country in this process. Place-based truth-telling can significantly advance grassroots reconciliation by improving local relationships and by triggering local action for change. As I said, it needs to be strengths-based and strengths-focused, that it looks to generate respect and understanding of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures and knowledge. And it absolutely has to be action-orientated, that truth-telling inspires participants to act to ensure injustices cannot continue or be repeated. Now, once established and we get these things up and running, we'll definitely be engaging with key stakeholders in this space to develop the kind of truth-telling practices that will advance these pillars. So while we all still reel from the referendum result, it is important to remember that there is growing broad support for this kind of work in the general community. In the 2022 Australian Reconciliation Barometer, which, if you're not aware, is a survey we undertake every 2 years, and it measures our progress towards a reconciled nation. It looks at where we need to focus more attention and what actions definitely need to be taken to progress this. So in the last one in 2022, in regards to truth-telling, 89% of the general community and 93% of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples believe it's important to undertake formal truth-telling processes in relation to Australia's shared history. 86% of Australians in the general community also felt that it was important for all Australians to learn about past issues of European colonisation, government policies for First Nations peoples, which is kind of on par with 89% of First Nations peoples. However, 43% of First Nations people had participated in a local truth-telling activity, compared to only 6% of the general community. And that's the kicker. That's the point where we all need to step up. So the more information we have on this picture, the better we'll be able to approach coming to terms with our past. Not so that we can just move on and get over it, but so we can move forward together. Because truth-telling is not about division, as some would suggest. It is actually a movement that seeks to bring us closer together. And while telling the truth about our history brings to life colonial conflict and dispossession, it also shows all of us the strength and immense contributions of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and cultures. So we've got to seize the moment to make a difference in this country, to challenge the status quo and not let another generation be lost to systems that were not built for First Nations people or even the diversity of Australia in the 21st century. And it's going to take each and every one of us who can see the benefits and opportunities of making space for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and our ways of being, knowing and doing. It's going to take each and every one of us to advocate for and defend those rights against those who would limit or take them away. Because now, more than ever, we need you in the fight for justice. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Karen. I just sit with that for a sec and let people take that in. While you're doing that, can you please think about some questions you might have for Karen on this topic? I think that the most important thing for me that I've been grappling with over the last couple of days, just as I turn my head to, moving forward, trying to be positive and strength-based and definitely resilient. I know some people don't like that word, but I don't know how else you say it in terms of, you get knocked down and you just keep getting back up again. That's what it feels like. I remember going to the show as a kid and getting one of those blow up things that just stands there and you can push it down and it just keeps coming up no matter how many times you push it. That's what I feel like. I think it's also important that truth telling is not new. It's not just something that's popped up this year or popped up because of the Uluru Statement. We've been trying to get truth telling into the hearts and minds of all Australians for a very long time, and our ancestors before us. Did you want to say some more on that bit, Karen?
Look, I was just going to say, you know, I'm sure, Jackie, you've had the same experience. You know, I was raised in that we have to keep getting up, even though it can feel exhausting, even though there are times when it just feels easier to stay down. But what are the alternatives? And I guess, you know, if I think about our theme for Reconciliation Week now more than ever, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, we've been doing this for a long time, and generations of getting back up and dusting ourselves off. And I guess that's the call out to our allies, to say, this is where we need you to perhaps step in sometimes, to do some of that heavy lifting. And I know all of your members and organisations are doing that, but I guess the time, as the referendum has shown us, we need to expand that circle, and that, because all of us are taking a battering at the moment. And the way that this is going to change is when we get that tipping point of our allies and co-conspirators who actually can see that benefit, that, you know, this isn't just about First Nations people. If we get it right for First Nations people, we get it right for any other community that is a minority in this country, any other community that looks at the world or sees the world or engages in the world differently to the kind of existing Western frames that continually kind of form the structures of our societies. And if we can make those allowances and difference actually becomes the norm, that benefits everyone. And, you know, again, if we think about who we are in a 21st century, this is where innovation happens. This is where difference of thought, different thinking outside the box actually benefits us in so many different ways. And we just need more people to understand what that benefit is.
Yeah. And I think it's also important that when we say truth telling and we need the truths of this country to be heard, it's not to lay blame, it's not to point the finger, it's not to say, oh, you non-Indigenous people are horrible. That's not it at all. But we want a shared history, and we want everyone to be on the same page in terms of understanding the impact of that history, which is predominantly on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So I think that's really important too. You know, it's not something to be afraid of, and we're not asking you to, you know, for your sorries or your take the blame for it. We're just wanting you to listen and hear and get educated about the true history of this country. 60,000 years. It's a rich history. It's a rich culture that we should be celebrating. But I think from my perspective, until we have these really honest conversations about what actually happened in that space, it's going to be really hard to move forward. Would you agree with that, Karen?
Absolutely. And my team at Reconciliation Australia, they hate it because I constantly ask, yeah, but why? And truth telling and understanding our past and our history is about understanding the why. It puts into context why we have the health and education statistics that we have as First Nations peoples. It puts into context trauma for us as people within this country and the relationships that we have with institutions and authority. It helps to unpack. And I think, and again, in the work that we've been doing, when people don't understand the why, we get caught up in this kind of misconception that everyone's equal, that we're all starting out the same, and therefore why aren't you getting better, or why can't, you know, things improve for your life? Because they're improving for my life, so why isn't it happening for you? And history, understanding what has happened in the past and the imposition of structures and limitations on our lives, how all of that contributes to where we find ourselves today. So until we can deal with that, until we can actually unpack that and then look to how those systems continue to impact on our lives today, we're just going to keep going around in circles. We're never going to fully get ahead. And so, you know, that why becomes so important. And as you say, it's not about making people feel guilty. And I certainly don't want any more hollow words of apology or people kind of feeling sad about it, even though these are times. I want action. And if there's anything that sort of came out of the end of last year, after I spent a couple of days in bed thinking, no, I don't want to face anyone, through my period of grieving came the anger and the kind of urgency, I think, that we're so close to getting this over the line. We've made so many wins. If we look back and step out of myself in this space for a little bit and look at what has actually changed in the 20 years of reconciliation, there's been massive improvements, but we're in this danger period that if people who are on this journey don't actually be more vocal and stand up, if they don't oppose some of the negative voices that feel that they've gotten permission to wind things back, and we've started to see that in the wake of the referendum. We've seen local councils pushing back on welcomes to country and acknowledgements of country. We've seen oppositions who were being part of and supportive of treaty processes and other agreement making who are now stepping back and opposing that. And I still believe that they're just the minority within our Australian society. But if our allies and our conspirators and those that said yes don't actually step up and be vocal in all of this, we are in danger of going backwards. Now, I know there's been a lot made around local governments in particular sort of pushing back on welcomes to country, and there was a lot of noise, but I think what's also been really heartening is even though things went to a vote, majority of those all got defeated. So we are seeing it, but there's just an urgency, if anything, for our movement that we can't relax here.
Yeah. I shared with a group yesterday that I'm so heartened that our future is in good hands. So many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander youth stood up, got themselves educated, probably more educated than many of us on human rights and social justice for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and many young people across Australia of all walks and lives are also in that boat. So, you know, if nothing else, we know that our future is in good hands, and we know that we need to support and embrace our youth to continue to carry the baton for us when we're not around. I've got a couple of questions from online, Karen, if you don't mind me reading them out. The first one, do other states and territories have a truth-telling process similar to the Yorta Commission in Victoria?
So Victoria is the most progressed, I guess, of the processes, and obviously that's been drawn from, they've got their Assembly of First Peoples in Victoria. Conversations are happening in Queensland. There's been conversations and things that are moving forward in South Australia with their South Australian voice to government, and part of that is truth-telling as well. New South Wales has started its treaty, well, it is appointing treaty commissioners to have a conversation with Aboriginal people within New South Wales to talk about what does that look like in this state. That's where I am. I'm not sure where things are up to in Tasmania and territories. I'm not so sure either. But I guess, you know, these are still baby steps. And I guess what we're asking for here is, again, our allies to be, I guess, supporting these processes, encouraging policymakers and decision makers and government people to be brave in all of this. But again, it's not just government. I mean, that is one part of it, but all of us can be doing this when we think about truth-telling within our organisations, understanding the histories of how some of our organisations existed and the relationships they've had in the past. These all contribute to this bigger kind of picture. And I think it's, again, that what can I do within my sphere of influence that actually makes a difference?
Yeah, great. Thank you. And what role do you see reconciliation action plans playing in truth-telling?
So as I said, truth-telling is very much part of reconciliation, and it's certainly something that we encourage all of our organisations that have reconciliation action plans. So there are very practical, pragmatic targets and things that happen around, whether it's employment and how organisations make workplaces safe for First Nations peoples, engagement around procurement and all the rest. But you know, I think there's a real opportunity there to also just explore that organisational history, you know, and that goes across whether it's corporates and how those corporate entities made their money, but equally how the not-for-profit sector as well. There's been long-term engagements with First Nations peoples and communities. And we can all be honest that not always have they been great. And again, this is that point of stepping into those difficult conversations, feeling uncomfortable, but also understanding the purpose and point of this, and that it isn't personal and it's not meant to make people feel bad. It is about understanding where we've come from and how that influences and impacts where we are today, and that something has to change if it's going to get better as we move forward.
I went to a talk the other day by Dr. Thomas Mayo, Yorta scholar, who talks a lot on allyship, and I fangirl someone around allyship. But she spoke about that sense of, when we move into this space, that sense of privilege and us understanding our privilege. I come from a sense of privilege, but I would suggest that non-Indigenous people come from a different sense of privilege compared to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And also that moving from safe to brave is going to be uncomfortable, because you're coming out of your comfort zone to make a change and make a difference for our country. So I think I would just leave that there with people to think about that. It's, you know, we turn up every day and are not comfortable in so many situations. So we're just asking for a little bit of action around that. We're here to support you, of course, as well. I think that's the other thing, is Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are very generous in our support for allies and our walking with allies, and trying to progress a better future, particularly for me, for my children and their children's children. Another question we have: are there examples of innovative and interactive ways of sharing history and experiences with non-Indigenous people to work for empathy?
Look, I think it's always, so one of those core pillars around our program is about place. And I think there's something really powerful when we situate truth-telling, or, I mean, we talk about from a reconciliation perspective as historical acceptance, which is about knowing the past, but accepting those truths and committing to doing better. There is something that's really powerful about situating that around place. It is about that First Nations cultural lens, because country and connection is everything. You know, the way you and I, Jackie, introduced ourselves, it was about connecting ourselves to either the places where we're from, or both, the places where we're from, but also where we find ourselves and live now. And when we can connect locally to a place, it just has a more immediate and tangible kind of connection. So we can see why particular suburbs or street names might be called a particular suburb or street name. I mean, I lived in Canberra for a very long time, in Ainslie, and there is a park, Kaurareg Park, which seems sort of like a nothing name, except there's a Bora ring in that park, and you can still today see the indentation of that. It's such a powerful thing to know. It's a little thing, but it's such a powerful thing that kind of connects to think about, for how thousands of generations there were people meeting in that place, coming together. And the fact that that kind of transcends from First Nations peoples right through to modern day 21st century Canberrans in Ainslie who walk their dogs sort of in and around there. Like, it blows my mind. And I think that's something that can be small, but at the same time really powerful to connect. And you start to look at things differently. And when you see something you see every day and you suddenly see it in a different light, maybe that sparks a different conversation. Maybe that sparks a different, maybe there's something else I could be doing. So I think there's a real power thinking locally and finding those connection points.
Thank you. The Reconciliation Australia Community Truth-Telling Pathways Program, when's that going to be launched, and will it be available to allies and a broader spectrum of people?
So everything we do is very publicly available. The reports that I talked about are definitely on our website already. There's the one that I spoke about, and there's another piece that we do with Deakin University, which was starting to identify some of the kind of, I guess, truth-telling initiatives that already exist out there. Launch is a really interesting term and comment. We're hopefully developing out of this process a framework that will help communities to engage in this work. It's an iterative thing. These things are not over, here is the kit, off you go. We're learning like everybody else in this process. And certainly as we learn and as we get to a point where we have things to launch or share with everyone, we'll certainly be hearing more. But certainly go check out our website. There's been a lot of thinking and developing and pulling together sort of things that already exist so that, again, we're not reinventing the wheel, that we're learning from what's gone before, and so that whatever we do next actually contributes and pushes us all a bit further along in the process. But yeah, check out our website and you'll see stuff, and you'll definitely hear from us as we get closer to having things to launch.
There was a comment in the chat. Let me just find it. So Ken Ola says, truth-telling seems to have been successful in countries where formerly oppressed people have come to power, for example, South Africa. Has it worked in circumstances like the current situation in Australia? If so, what can we learn from that experience? So I guess we're also saying, is there international experiences that we can lean on as well?
Yeah, certainly our early work on truth-telling drew a lot on international examples of this. And I think one of the strongest things, which is also picked up in the work of Professor Heidi Norman, is there are different kinds of truth-telling. So within in South Africa, where we actually pinched their reconciliation barometer idea from, they, through formalized hearings and legal hearings, it was very much driven from the international kind of standards around truth-telling as a means for justice. What the report, our recent report identifies is there's kind of a couple of different, I guess, the intent or what people expect out of a truth-telling process. And so the four things around truth-telling to achieve justice for First Nations people, which is the South African experience. Then there's truth-telling to promote reconciliation and healing. And I would say probably the Canadian experience of truth-telling is probably a little bit more along those lines. Then there's this idea of truth-telling, which is about challenging and changing historical understanding. So I guess it's correcting the records. So it wasn't that long ago that the story of, say, Aboriginal diggers, Black diggers within the army and within international conflicts wasn't really widely known. So a lot of work has been done about telling those stories. And I guess I like to call it painting Aboriginal people back into the picture, this idea of who we are as Australians. And I would say that any international practice or any practice of truth-telling probably has a little bit of all three, but some may take one of those forms or another. Sorry, that was badly worded. But essentially, the way we do truth-telling is often determined by the kind of outcomes that we're looking to get. And then the report also talks about this idea of cultural practice, which again is the form of how you do that. Hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. Is Reconciliation Australia seeing any promising examples of organisations or corporates taking action in the truth-telling space?
So there's some interesting projects that are on or being explored. One of the ones, and it's only because it's top of mind, not for any other particular reason, but Telstra, who have some particular milestone coming up within their corporate entity. I think it might be coming up to the 100th anniversary of the Overland Telegraph, which is the kind of such an important piece of infrastructure and technology, which then gave rise to the telephone systems and connected us with the rest of the world and a whole heap of other things. And in telling that historical story, they're actually taking time out to tell stories of First Nations peoples, because while we can talk about the amazing technological advancement of the Overland Telegraph and how important that was for kind of a growing nation, it nevertheless dispersed a whole heap of Aboriginal people whose country that telegraph line actually scarred. So they're taking that really seriously about how do we tell those stories and what does that mean today in that context. There are some other businesses that are also starting to take those kind of early steps in, particularly as they come up to those corporate milestones of their history. What does that actually mean and look like? And while we can't go back and do things differently, how do we not just acknowledge that past, but think about what is that enduring legacy and what can we do today around that legacy?
Thank you. I can't see any more questions at this stage, but I guess I would add that I work for the Fred Hollows Foundation. My role is Director Social Justice Regional Engagement. So I have a responsibility to work with a non-Indigenous organisation within the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health and social justice space. And I guess I would say to that question is that there's a lot of opportunity to look within your organisations. I think many of us do great work externally, and we have a great reputation and relevance in the sector in terms of what we do and how we do it. I think how you do business is also very important. But we've spent the last couple of years looking internally. So we pride ourselves on everything that we do is underpinned by the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. We can anecdotally show you how we do that, but we're developing a tool. We've used consultants to develop a tool to assess ourselves by those, by that legislation and the principles of free, prior, informed consent and self-determination. We're just in the early stages of that, but that's an example of, you know, taking the courage to look internally and assess yourself as an organisation, to then better your ability to support and work appropriately with and for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. So one more question, I think. Oh no, okay, yes we do. Sorry. What do we say to people that state unequivocally that the referendum results show that reconciliation is dead? I'm sure you've heard this a couple of times now, Karen.
So I again point to the 6.2 million Australians that voted yes. I look to the generations of young people, a lot of whom I spoke to during the referendum campaign, who wished that they were 18 and were able to vote. I take heart because, again, you know, sometimes it's that frog in a bucket or in a saucepan that's boiling or something to that effect. But trying to take yourself out of things sometimes to really kind of look at, has there been progress or are we just kidding ourselves? And I do think that change has happened. The point is that reconciliation is not a destination. It is a journey. It is a process. And again, that's the point of our theme for National Reconciliation Week this year. It's actually now more than ever, we need to dig deep, and that we need more people on this side of the fence pushing to topple all of those barriers that stop us from being the best nation that we can possibly be. And that starts with supporting First Nations people, voices, our rights and our aspirations. And that lifts all of us into a better country. So I appreciate that some people feel that way. And certainly, as I said, our relationship took quite a big knock, and it was hard not to feel that it was personal. But again, I hear the voices of my mother and my grandmother and my aunties who have passed, that this cannot and will not be the end, and that we will continue to fight no matter what, and with every breath that we have. And the more people that we can bring along with us, the better. And that's really what the work of reconciliation is.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. Thanks, Karen. You know, and I think that understanding that it's a journey. So the 1967 referendum was a journey to get there. You know, Uluru Statement, writing the statement was a journey. Voice Treaty Truth is a journey. You know, reconciliation has to be a journey, just like National Reconciliation Week is a week of celebration of reconciliation. It's not the only time we think about reconciliation. Like, we have to think about it every single day. And I would, from a very naive perspective, say if people are saying reconciliation is dead, then why are we here? what do we want this country to be? Are we happy to accept that? I'm personally not, and I don't think my children are. And you know, we will be resilient, strong, and keep turning up. And I think if nothing else from the referendum for me is that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have a voice. We know how to use it, and we are asking allies to walk with us and support us and do the heavy lifting to change the psyche of this country. So thank you so much, Karen. Really appreciate your time in such a busy week. I think we had some really great questions, so thank you, audience, for your questions. As we said earlier, this is a series that we've done of Voice, Treaty, Truth. Thomas Mayo spoke to us around voice. Ngarra Murray spoke to us around treaty. And then thank you, Karen, for speaking to us around truth-telling. Obviously, an hour is not enough to have the full conversations that need to be had, but we hope that we've inspired you to action, to think about your role and responsibilities in terms of advancing the rights of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and standing on the right side of history as we move forward. Allies for Uluru is here to help you if we can in any way. So please also reach out if there's any information we can get to you or any contacts we can make for you. I think we'll be in touch as we go forward. And yeah, just thank you so much again, Karen, and everyone for joining us today. Hope you have a great rest of Reconciliation Week, and we look forward to talking to you soon. Bye,
Thanks,
everybody.
Jackie. Thanks.